just to check in with your friends in the group. And part of the reason for doing that is just to get a bit of clarity about what's actually going on. So part of what we're doing with practicing the Dharma is we try things out. Like the Dharma's got all kinds of bits of advice about what is a good way to live a life, what the kind of principles, and then we apply them. Important just to reflect on, well, what did we do? What effect did it have? How could we refine our practice in the coming time? So there's this constant process of reflection. So that's part of what we're engaged in the groups is that kind of process of reflection, as well as just hearing what other people had to say. So I think there's something about hearing other people engage with the practice, with meditation, that helps us see what we're trying to do a little bit more clearly. It's just inspiring just to hear other people. I was really impressed with in the group that I was in, just that people were really having a really good go at it. People were really engaging with it, and that was having an effect. And it's just really inspiring when you witness that in somebody else, and when you have an opportunity to communicate that and have other people witness that in yourself, which actually in a way quite neatly brings us to perfect speech, which is the third limb of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is what I'm going to be talking about this evening for the next short while. Before I do that, I just want to remind us where we've come from so far. So we've been looking at the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, this path with 8 different aspects. And we started by exploring perfect vision, by bringing to mind those moments in our own life when we've had a glimpse, we've had some of something more true, something more real, or you could even say something more beautiful. And if you've got the book, you would have read all kinds of things about different Buddhist teachings that try and explain of the truth. And I just wanted to say that don't worry about, if you don't understand all of it, don't worry about it. There'll be more opportunities to hear more in the future if you want to hear more. So don't worry about trying to catch all of it all at once, because there is one of the things you'll find if you study Buddhism is there's an awful lot of it. There's a lot of teachings, there's a lot of different traditions. What you end up seeing more and more as you study it, as you look into it over the years, is that they're all expressions of some very fundamental principles. And so what I've been trying to do in this course, and what I will do, is trying to emphasize the most fundamental principles. So if you can't follow all the detail, just try not to worry about it too much. Just as long as you've got something to be getting on with, that's the main thing. Again, I was saying that in the group just now, that don't worry if, like, for example, I gave you maybe 2 or 3 things to practice during the week. If you just manage to do one of them, that's fine, as long as you're really doing it, as long as you've got something to be getting on with. So yes, I just wanted to mention that. So in our lives, we have these moments of, we see things a little bit more clearly. We might have a little bit more of a sense of what our life is about and the kinds of things that we want to pursue in our life. And we sort of set out on the path. And this is, in the Buddhist tradition, this is what's known as the path of vision. And then, in a way, that the challenge comes where we encounter the path of transformation. Yeah, so this is where we come to see that to make real progress, we have to bring our emotions on board. We have to engage our emotions, which are the driving force of everything we do in our lives. So this is where we move from the stage of perfect vision to the stage of perfect emotion, or the path of vision to the path of transformation. And we start addressing this very central problem in any spiritual life, that which is to find emotional equivalent understandings. So that we need to find of engaging fully with the truth that we know intellectually. So this is, like I said, this is what we looked at last week, perfect emotion. And we saw that positively speaking, it was about generosity, it was about loving kindness, and also about faith. So we move now to perfect speech. And the first thing to notice, so you've got the image of the 8-spoked wheel, So there it is there, the Eightfold. And what's interesting to notice is that it's a wheel, it's a circle. It's not a series of steps or a ladder, but it's a circle. And what that's saying is that in a way, these different aspects of the Eightfold Path, they are aspects, they're limbs. The word, the original Sanskrit and Pali word is actually anga, which means limb. Literally, your arm is an anga, your head is an anga, your legs are angas. So it's more literally, it's a noble eight-limbed path. So it's this path of 8 different aspects. However, they are laid out in a sequence. So you've got perfect vision, perfect emotion, perfect speech, and so on. And there is some kind of logic to that. There is some kind of logic to the sequence of the stages or the limbs. So so now we come to perfect speech. And what this is pointing to is the fact that as human beings, we communicate. We do it so much, we don't really realize that we're doing it. But if you think about your day, if you think about what you did today, I can pretty much guarantee that most of what you did would have been communicating in some way with other people. It might be that you were just mulling over some communication that you'd had. You might have been reading something. You might have been even looking at all of that as a communication. You might have been communicating something yourself. You might have been something or giving somebody some advice, or just explaining something to somebody, or sending somebody an invoice, or a million and one things. But so much of what we do is communication. So Dharma is concerned with the total transformation. Speech, communication needs to come into the picture, and in a way, it comes into the picture quite early on. So it's a measure of how important Buddhism sees communication, that it's got a limb unto itself, in a way that says something about the importance of communication. In Buddhism, the human person is thought of as having 3 primary aspects, or 3 primary kind of avenues or doorways of action. So you've got body. We do things with our body. We act through our body, with our arms and our hands and our mouth, etc. And there's our mind, of course. We've heard quite a bit about that already. We've looked at it, in particular in relation to meditation, which includes mind, of course, and Buddhism includes the emotion. And then there's speech. So the main categorization, or the main way of understanding aspects of a person is body, speech, and mind. So speech is a whole section in itself. So body, speech, and mind is what makes up the human person. And you find this right the way through the Buddhist tradition. Body, speech, and mind is talked about as a way of understanding what a human being is, and probably more importantly, what a human being does. And we'll see this a little bit more next week. We'll see how different kinds of ethical precepts relate to the different ways that we act, the way that we act through our body, the way that we act through what we say and what we communicate, through the mind. Now, in later Buddhism, so Buddhism went through a whole series of development about its 2,500 year history. And when it was still practiced in India, there was a stage called the Vajrayana. Vajra means diamond, so it's the diamond way. And in that way of understanding, or way of practicing Buddhism, one of the things that the Vajrayana was quite concerned with is in a way seeing the body symbolically, seeing different Buddhist teachings and how they correspond to different centers in the body. So the way that those 3 aspects of the human person correspond to different centers in the body is that it's often thought of as body is the head center, speech, as you'd expect, is the throat, and mind is the heart center. Sometimes people find that interesting, that body is the head and the mind is the heart, not the other way around. But that is the way that it's traditionally thought of. There's also sometimes a correlation of the intellect in in the brain, in the head center, and the emotions in the heart center. Um, and that corresponds quite closely with what we've been talking about in terms of perfect vision and perfect emotion, or intellect and emotion, and bringing the two together. And the speech center lies halfway between the intellect center and the emotion center. So what we're trying to do with perfect speech is to communicate not just what we think, but what we also what we feel, and through doing that, bringing the two together. So affecting that integration of the heart and the brain, as it were, that the emotions and the intellect. And you might notice that, if you have a really, really good conversation with a friend, sometimes you might sit down with a friend and you really go deeply in terms of sharing yourself and also witnessing the other person. You witness them, they witness you, you share yourself, they share yourself. You communicate. You don't even really know that it's happening. It doesn't feel like an effort. It just feels like a deep sort of simpatico, a deep resonance between you. And afterwards, you feel really kind of whole. You feel kind of really, you feel really complete. And your mind might feel quite calm. Often I've noticed myself that after having a really good conversation, I feel really deeply satisfied, and deeply kind of whole. And I think what's happening there is, through the act of communicating what's inside, you kind of bring, sort of alleviate a tension that you might feel between what you think and what you feel. You might even discover what you think and what, through the act itself of communicating. So I think that's part of the reason why speech comes after emotion, is because it's such a central um, kind of action. It's such a central means of affecting the path of transformation. Yeah, so it's really, really central, really, really important. So I wanted to talk about it in a traditional way, which is talking about perfect speech as having four different aspects. So, as is typical with Buddhism, there's an aspect that you're trying to cultivate, and then there's an aspect you're trying to move away from, or you're trying to abandon. And there's a correspondence between the two. So, in the same way that last week we heard about, trying not to be cruel and trying to be compassionate, when we start talking about speech, which is what we'll look at, like trying to be truthful, and that means trying to be untruthful. So I'll just introduce you to the four different aspects of perfect speech, and then I'll talk about each one of them a little bit more, in a little bit more depth. So here they all are. So the first one is truthful speech. So we endeavor to be truthful, and we try and avoid false speech or untruthfulness. And then the second one is affectionate speech or kindly speech. So trying to, communicate with an atmosphere, with an attitude of metta, which means avoiding harshness, rough, harsh, caustic, abrasive speech. The third one is being helpful in what we say, so speaking helpfully, and avoid being harmful in the way that we speak, or unhelpful. You could. The fourth aspect of perfect speech is speaking harmoniously. So speaking in such a way that it brings people together, it creates harmony between people, and avoiding discordant speech, or speech that promotes disharmony or mistrust. Sometimes it's called slanderous speech. So a really good way of bringing about disharmony is by slandering people, by sharing criticisms of people with a third party. So I'll just say a little bit about each of those in turn. So truthful speech begins. There's one little point to make. I mean, I've talked about them as four aspects. You can also understand them as like four deepening levels of skillful or perfect speech. So looking at speech, it begins by factual accuracy. So in a way, this might sound quite prosaic, but in a way, it's quite important. Just when we report something, we report it accurately. We say what actually happened. So it's quite easy to create a false impression. Actually, sometimes we do it without really realizing that we're doing it. We're just a little bit um, careless, actually. We just can't really be bothered to find the right words to describe what happened. And it can create a false impression. It's really interesting. I don't know if you've had this experience. If you go to an event and then you read about it in a newspaper, it can sometimes be quite uh, kind of discombobulating, because you read it and you think that's not actually quite what happened. I was there, and that's not quite right. It's probably mostly right, but it's not quite right. And often I think it's just the experiences I've had where that's happened, it's felt a little bit like there's not been a deliberate attempt to falsify what happened. It's just that the person couldn't quite be bothered to check the details, if you see what I mean. So there's quite an onus, I think, and at this level of just actually reporting things accurately, just actually saying what happened quite clearly. It might sound like a kind of a trifling thing, but I think it actually is quite important, because we train ourselves just to actually be mindful of what we're saying and checking that what we're saying is actually what happened. And part of the reason for doing that is because it's quite common that we just say things without really thinking about it, but present ourselves in a particular kind of way. So a lot of untruthful speech is not kind of gross lying. I mean, obviously, gross lying is problematic, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But often we just kind of exaggerate or minimize in order to make ourselves look a particular way. It's spoken of as like we're doing a kind of a PR exercise for ourselves. Yeah, we're trying to present things in a particular way to make ourselves look good. Weirdly, we can even present things to make ourselves look bad for various cultural reasons. I think sometimes it can be quite difficult. One doesn't want to be seen as being self-important or self-aggrandizing. So sometimes we minimize things we've done in order to not appear that we're talking ourselves up a lot. That can be quite a difficult one, actually, is that if something went well, it's actually just saying it went well, with no critical about it, but actually just saying quite frankly that we did something and it actually went quite well. It gets quite subtle. We start realizing how invested we are in making things appear a particular way, so other people will think about us in a particular way. It really gets quite subtle, and I think that's what this is really about. It's not just a sort of a kind of it's not a simple matter, actually, being truthful. And of course, then it means, if we're trying to say what we think, there's a whole thing about actually knowing what we think. Often we don't really know what we think and feel about things. We haven't stopped to reflect, really know what the truth is in terms of what our experience is. I mean, I do think it's interesting that these days, I think there's so much communication, particularly verbal or written communication. I'm thinking of email, social media, etc. That maybe this is just me being old-fashioned, but I do wonder if we're losing the ability to write in a reflective kind of way. We just write what comes into our head and then we press send. We don't so much kind of think, well, what do I want to say, and what's the best way of expressing this? That's a discipline, and it's actually quite important. If we want to communicate deeply with other people, we need to learn how to reflect on what it is that we really want to say, what it is that's really important. I've noticed that this is one of the things I think that meditation makes a big difference with, is when we meditate, we start with what we actually think and what we actually feel. And then from that awareness, we're then able to communicate more genuinely, more truly, authentically. And I mean, people often report this, in the Metta Bhavana, for example, you start discovering what your actual responses are to people, not what you think your responses are, but what they actually are. you might find, for example, that when you bring to mind your friend, you notice that you're actually a bit jealous of them. That was there, but you'd never noticed it before. So in order to be really honest with yourself, you need to actually know what's going on, and meditation and the whole process of developing awareness really, really helps with that. So that's all part of truthful speech. It's about knowing what's really going on and then saying what's really going on. And like I said earlier, sometimes I think we actually discover what's going on through communicating, actually in the process of communicating. I often find that myself, that it's not until I try and have a go at talking about what's going on, maybe more internally, psychologically, spiritually even, that I discover what the reality of that is. And it's not until I hear the words coming out of my mouth and have other people witness them that I know what I really think. I think different people are different in this respect. Some people know what they think without needing to articulate it, but other people, I think, need to articulate what's going on within in order to sort of have it reflected back, to know whether it's actually true. So it's actually quite a deep thing, just being truthful. And the thing about what we say is that when we speak, it's as if we're kind of creating a particular. So I think this is the issue with untruthfulness, is that if we're presenting ourselves in another way, particularly if we're doing it consciously, we're kind of creating a reality, a sort of alternative reality that doesn't correspond with actual reality. So we're kind of living in two different worlds. We're living in the world of what we're thinking and what we're saying, and then we're living in the world of what we're actually doing and what we're actually thinking. And I think that's what's so corrosive about untruthfulness, is that it's profoundly disintegrating, because we're living in different realities in different times in relation to different people. So yeah, I think that's a sort of a deeper issue, and I think it's interesting to reflect that. The word integrity, to be honest, means to have integrity, and that word integrity is deeply connected with the notion of integration, of being whole. So truthfulness is deeply connected with the notion of wholeness, of being a whole person. So there's a lot. Ironically, there's a lot that can be said about speech, but the next stage, or the next sort of level, as it were, is affectionate speech. And what this is really about is realizing that we do a vacuum. When we speak to somebody. And what this is about is actually having an awareness of who we're talking to. So another person is not just a kind of passive receptacle for our output, as it were. We're aware of the other person as a person. So as we're speaking, as we're communicating, we're aware of how they're receiving what we're saying. So you could say that this brings into in particularly the element of metta, the element of that kind of fellow feeling or goodwill. So we're aware of who we're talking to and what they need to hear, without reference to what we need to say. Because often we might want to say something, but the person we want to say it to isn't in a place where they can hear it. So we need to have some kind of an awareness of what's appropriate for the other person, without reference to ourselves. And I think this is interesting because often what comes up in discussions of speech is the whole notion of a white lie. So this is where you feel like you have to say something untrue because of the other sensitivities from the other person. But I think it's really worth reflecting on, is it really going to benefit somebody to have the reality of things misrepresented? Is it really going to benefit someone to go away thinking that something's the case when it's not the case? Often I think our white lies are actually to avoid saying something which is difficult to say or is uncomfortable to say, which is not to say that, that the injunction to speak truthfully is all about saying harsh, to people who aren't in a position to hear them. So quite a subtle thing, I think, and it does involve a lot of sensitivity. But yeah, so affectionate speech is where we're not just aware of what's true, but we're aware of who we're speaking to, and we've got some concern, some affection, some kindness towards them. So then the next level is helpful speech. So is what we're saying actually helpful? For example, what is it doing to the atmosphere? Because we're always kind of editing. There's lots of things we could say, but we're always kind of editing what we're actually going to. We're always kind of picking. For example, if somebody asks us how our day was, it's like we're picking the things that we're going to talk about and maybe leaving other bits out. So part of the reason I say this is it's quite easy to, if something goes badly for us during our day, often it's the first thing we want to talk about, and not all the things that go well. And if we do that, if we moan about the things that went badly, it has a kind of an effect on the atmosphere. It has an effect on the person that we're talking to. So obviously, sometimes it's necessary to talk about difficult things. It's necessary even to be critical in order to be helpful. But I think it's really important just to bring some awareness to, is what we're saying actually helpful? Is it, what effect is it having for the person that I'm saying it to, or the people that I'm saying it to? I just wanted to give a little example of this. I was talking to somebody who was really, really angry with a mutual friend, and he was, I thought, being quite unbalanced about this friend. And he was saying things that were critical about him, that in a way were true, but they were kind of completely out of balance. He was really, really upset with him. And it's almost like, I actually said to him at one point when he was talking about my friend, I said, I don't recognize the person that you're describing. And what I then started to do was I just started talking about all the things that I appreciated about the friend that he was criticizing, instead of actually arguing with him, and saying, how dare you talk about him like that? It's disgraceful. I mean, it kind of was disgraceful, but I just decided, rather than doing that, I just started talking about all the things that I appreciated about him. And it kind of completely changed the dynamic. And I think it sort of got him out of a particular kind of state. He was in a bit of a state. So I think that's something that we can do is we can be quite skillful in the way that we respond when the atmosphere might be getting a little bit poisonous. So for example, if you're in that situation that often comes up if you're in a working environment and there's that person in the office that nobody likes, and I mean, probably this isn't happening at the moment, work in that way, but you might be in the lunchroom and that person's being slagged off. And one way of responding to that is just talking about the things that you appreciate about that person. It can make a massive difference, actually. Anyway, that's just a little bit on helpful speech. There's more about all of this in the book. The fourth level is kind of the deepest level, and what this is about is harmonious speech. It's about creating concord and unity. So you could say that it's mutual helpfulness based on truthfulness and awareness of each other's being and needs. And that leads to a kind of mutual self-transcendence. So you're no longer thinking about yourself. There's just a sense of a sort of a commonality between people. And it's interesting to notice that the more you know, the better you know somebody, often the less there is to say. You can be with somebody, it feels like you're communicating with them, but you don't need to say an awful lot, or you can just say a very, very small thing, and there's a definite sense of simpatico. Because communication is not just about content, is it? It's not just about what we say. It's a quality of kind of a mutual awareness, or even kind of mutual kind of exchange of energy. You get this most perfectly expressed on a retreat, where you're just sitting with other people, maybe sitting in silence, and there's a really, really deep sense of this kind of fellow feeling, but nobody's saying anything. They're sitting in silence. It's sort of a very deeply kind of fertile, rich kind of experience. It can be almost kind of womb-like, but nobody's actually speaking. So it's as if the deepest level of harmony is actually an experience of silence. So I kind of wanted to talk just a little bit about speech, because it's so easy just to sort of skip over speech and think, oh yeah, okay, speech in Buddhism, perfect speech in Buddhism is just not telling porky pies. But it is that, but it's actually, a lot more than that. It's really got a lot of depth to it in terms of communication. So just to sum up, so when we're talking about truthful speech, what we're talking about is avoiding untruths and truthful, with all that that implies, being affectionate, so actually really being aware of who we're talking to, and trying to be helpful when we speak, not just talking for the sake of it in a kind of useless, unhelpful kind of way, and actually trying to bring about harmony between people in the way that we speak, which means avoid, for example, slander, speaking ill of other people without reason. So that's that's a broad sort of overview of perfect speech. Hopefully that gives you some kind of sense of the territory. What we'll do when we come back after the break is you just explore that in a kind of in a kind of more practical way. So it's so it's 12 minutes past, and actually let's come back at 10 past if that's okay, because we've got a little bit to do. We'll come back at 10 past, and if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so it's 10 past, so we'll start. So we've just got a few questions. Thanks for those. So yeah, this is a question about the neutral person stage of the Metta Bhavana. In some ways, this is the most challenging stage of the practice because it doesn't provoke any particular response. It doesn't, because the person's neutral. What we often do is we just get kind of bored, we just drift off and start thinking about something that we find more interesting. So all that we have to go on in the neutral person stage is that the other person is actually a person, that they have experienced. They experience pleasure and pain. We don't have anything else to go on. So in some ways, it's almost like the purest stage in a certain kind of a way, that there's nothing in it for us. So I think what we need to do is just reflect really deeply on the fact that they share. You can start actually by just reflecting that they share a human body. They have a body like we have a body. And hopefully you can begin to just identify with them on that very, very fundamental level. And then, of course, they've got hopes and fears. You don't have to kind of create a whole narrative about them in order to do that. It's just a matter of, I think, to begin with, just a sense of their life as being vividly real to them. I think that's part of the key, is just that person's life is vividly real to them. It really is, and it really matters to that person. And just starting from that point, so it involves a little bit more imagination, not in the sense of creating a whole narrative, but just imagination in the sense of just identifying with the fact that they really exist from their own side, that their life is important to them. I think that's all I'll say. But it is challenging. If you find it challenging, don't worry. If you find any of the Metta Bhavana challenging, don't worry. It is challenging. It's a difficult practice, so you will find it challenging. But it's deeply transformative in the way that I was describing last week. Someone's just made a comment. This is really helpful for me to become more aligned with truth. Quite often people can seem a bit disconcerted by my honesty. I think I need to employ some reflectiveness to avoid coming across too harsh. So I think it's a real skill to be able to say things which need to be said, which are true, and saying it in a way which is sensitive to how people are going to be able to receive that. And actually, what I've noticed is say things which are actually quite, you can be quite frank, but if you do it in a kindly way, people are able to hear it. If you do it in an unkind way, people will tend to react unless they're very, very emotionally robust and mature. People will tend to react to criticism. So it's a real art, I think, to saying difficult things in a skillful way. That when I say art, I use that word advisedly. It really is an art. An interesting question came up in our group regarding the Metta Bhavana. Is it idealistic to say that anyone can get to a point where they can put absolutely any difficult person into their fourth stage? Some people spoke of very difficult experiences. So I believe even that it is possible to get to a state where you can encounter very harsh treatment from other people and not experience hatred, not generate hatred from that. And partly because I've heard people describe, like for example, I've heard people describe in Tibet who were treated very, very harshly by the Chinese invaders, very, like terribly cruelly, like unspeakably cruelly, and not generated hatred from that. I've heard some quite cogent accounts of stories of that kind. It is the Buddhist tradition that you can do that. So that's in a way the ideal. I think what we need to be aware of is where we actually are in that, and not in a way kind of traumatizing ourselves with the Metta Bhavana by bringing to mind people who might have injured us, and in a way working towards that. So I think we need to be a little bit intelligent about how we approach it and not sort of bite off more than we can chew, but at the same time really trying to develop, almost to try and ask ourselves the question, well, what would it be like to be able to not hate this person, or not be deeply triggered by this person? Now that might take a long time, because I'm aware of the fact that for some of us, we will have been harmed by other people, maybe quite grievously. And so I don't want to kind of pretend that everything's nicey-nicey, because human life can be quite brutal at times, and people do things to each other, and we might have encountered that ourselves. So I think, but you can transform that. You can honor the fact that experiences have happened that have been very, very difficult, at the same time not carrying a burden of resentment about that, and that is deeply freeing. And I have heard people who've gone through some very, very difficult times, in like war zones and so on. They've been treated unspeakably cruelly. People who've lost relatives to murder and so on, who've actually been able to forgive. So I think there is an element of Metta Bhavana that particularly comes up in the fourth stage, which is about forgiveness, which is just acknowledging the reality of loss and being able to put it down. So I wouldn't want to minimize the idealism. Idealism is really important. If we don't have it, we won't even begin to start. But at the same time, we need to recognize where we are with it, and in a way be kind with ourselves where we are with it, and not sort of force ourselves into something which we're not ready for. So it does take a bit of practice, actually, a bit of skill to know what's appropriate for us to take on at any given point in time with that practice. So hopefully that helps. There's a lot one could say. And then something similar came up. The subject of resistance to the Metta Bhavana, because of strong feelings of nausea, anger, and frustration, came up in our group. So again, I'd say, just be mindful of what you're able for at any particular point in time. So if there is somebody who's just too difficult, pick somebody who's less. Approach it by maybe just bring them to mind for a very short period and move on to something else. Because I am aware that it can bring up some very, very deep things. So Shannon's asking, I've only joined tonight, unfortunately, so I'm wondering, do you provide notes for this course? We don't, but there is a book. So we'll give you emails about the book in the email that we'll send you. How do you respond helpfully in a harmonious way to someone who is angry and dismissive when you try to communicate or respond to what they're saying? Sometimes it's difficult to answer questions like that in such a kind of like an artificial kind of environment. Like if we could have a chat, we could chat about it. So I think sometimes in terms of Buddhist ethics, and in a way what we're talking about is ethics, the ethics of communication, often what you need to do is reflect quite deeply, and that might involve discussing it with friends. So probably in order to really meaningfully engage with the question, which is a really good one, it would involve actually having a bit of a chat about what's going on and what you might do. Because if someone's really angry with you, and maybe dismissive, maybe disrespectful, it can be quite difficult to communicate skillfully with them. I mean, we've probably all had that experience, and quite how to do that skillfully is a big question. I mean, like I'll be hanging around at the end if you want to. We can talk about it a little bit more, but I wouldn't want to. I'd be in danger of saying something kind of glib by responding to a question like that in a format like this. So I hope it's okay just to leave that there for the moment. So what I wanted to do now is thanks for your question. So I'll be kicking around for 10 or 15 minutes afterwards if there's more questions that might be a little bit more personal, maybe. So what I wanted to do now is just do a little exercise, actually. And I was talking earlier about how we create an atmosphere in the way that we choose to talk, or what we choose to talk about. So it's as if, when we speak, it's like we're articulating something that's in our mind, maybe a memory, maybe a thought, and we're editing that. We're kind of deciding which bits of what we're thinking we're going to communicate to others. And it has to be admitted that we have a bit of a bias often to talk about negative things that have happened, painful things or things we didn't like, at the expense of things that we appreciated or things that we enjoyed. And particularly in relation to other people. So I must confess, this morning I was in a meeting and somebody did something which I found really disagreeable, and it kind of got my goat, and I talked about it with somebody else. And after I did that, I had to actually kind of correct myself by saying, actually, the meeting was really good. Overall, it was really, really good. And that was just one bit of the whole meeting, but kind of do a bit of peddling to get there, because I'd started off in quite a negative, I was in a bit of a bad mood and started off on a bit of a negative kind of slant, which skewed the whole thinking about the meeting in a skewed kind of slightly sour way, because I'd talked about this one particular element of it, which was only a very small part of the meeting. And I think we do that. And we do that in relation. So one way of kind of correcting that, and it's an example of skillful speech, of perfect speech, of, you could say it's affectionate speech and helpful speech and truthful speech, and actually harmonious speech as well, is what's called rejoicing in merits, which was when we consciously and deliberately and even creatively describe the good qualities of another person. So we're rejoicing in their merits, so we're rejoicing in their good qualities. And interestingly, it's said to be an antidote to jealousy. Jealousy came up in one of the questions last week, and I didn't think to say this, but actually I was chatting with a friend of mine. I was saying, what would you say if somebody asked you what to do about jealousy? And he just read this in a Dharma book and mentioned it. So I thought I'd just bring that in. It's said to be an antidote to jealousy. So what I want to do is just try something out here. So I'm just going to ask you to think of a person, and then I'll just ask you some questions. And if you have got a piece of paper, you might like to write down a few little notes. Don't worry too much if you haven't got a piece of paper handy, but if you do, you might like just to jot down a few little ideas. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into our groups again, and we will just share. We'll just rejoice in somebody with the other people listening on. Yeah. So and we'll just see what happens when we do that. It doesn't matter that the other people don't know the person, because they'll get to know them actually by you describing their good qualities. So yeah, so we'll just do this for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go into our groups. So Kevin, if you could have the groups ready to go, that'd be terrific. Yeah, maybe they already are. So yeah, so first of all, I'd just like you to think of a person that you like. Yeah, think of a person that you like. It might be a friend, it might be a family member. Just think of someone that you like, and try to evoke a little bit like you're doing the Metta Bhavana in the second stage. Just bring to mind the person, their particular. You might like to think of the way they look. You might like to think of the way they speak, the way they communicate, the sorts of things that they say, and the way that they say them. Maybe they've got a particular turn of phrase. So just call them to mind. you look at the shape of their body, the kinds of things that they wear even, or the way that the expressions of their face, but just trying to get a sense of their particular qualities, what makes that person, and not somebody else. So can you say what it is that you like about them? So what is it about them that you like, that you appreciate? You could jot a few things down if you wish. And don't worry if nothing comes. It might be a memory of an incident, like something that they did that you really appreciated, maybe a gift that they gave you, or a time that they helped you. So you might think about how they've benefited you, how your connection with that person has benefited you. Maybe you know that other people appreciate them for certain things that maybe aren't so significant to you, but other people value. So what would you say are the particular qualities? Maybe it's generosity, maybe it's fearlessness. Just see if you can describe it in a word, or maybe an image. Actually, an image might come to you. You might think when you think of them, you might think of a kind of an animal, or I don't know, another image of some kind. So again, don't worry if nothing comes. You might find that as you start talking about them, more arises. Yeah, more sort of comes into your mind. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our groups, and we just have maybe 3 minutes each just to talk about the person. And don't worry about being balanced. What I mean is, like, don't worry about only talking about their good qualities. In a way, that's the point of the exercise. Don't think, well, they're really generous, but sometimes they can be a bit mean. Maybe they are, but you don't just say that. The purpose of the exercise is just to talk about the positive qualities of that person, their good qualities. And you don't worry if you run out of things to say. If you wait and just let your mind kind of relax, you might find that other things come to you. So it might be a story, you might just tell a story about something that they did and the way that they did it. So yeah, so we'll do that now for about 18 minutes. So we should have about 3 minutes each, depending on the size of the group. So we'll just do what we did at the beginning of the evening, which is we'll just choose the particular group. So Kevin, I'll just set that going now. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that. I enjoyed just hearing. I enjoyed speaking, and I also enjoyed hearing other people talking about the people that they appreciate. I was hoping to do a little bit of meditation. We haven't got a long time, but I just wanted to mention a little quote. It comes from a writer. I think he's Scottish, guy called John Burnside, and he's got this quote, which I came across, which is what we love in ourselves is ourselves loving. So I think sometimes we can get a bit hung up with like the first stage of the Metta Bhavana, and so one way we can approach it is just what we love in ourselves is ourselves loving. So it's like we kind of feel this kind of sense of love for ourselves when we experience ourselves loving somebody else, and you might have a kind of that kind of might be. You might be kind of in that right now. So what I thought we could do is just sort of do a little bit of Metta Bhavana. We'll bring to mind that friend again. And in a way, just quite simply, just sit with the appreciation that we have for them. And then we'll just, in a way, direct that attitude of appreciation towards ourselves. Yeah, so just very, very simple. We're not going to be... that's what we'll do. So yeah, close to, and we'll just sit quietly for a minute or two before we start. So bring to mind that same person again that you are speaking about. And you don't need to do anything special, just sit with the appreciation that you have for them. So experiencing that appreciation not just as a thought, but noticing if there's a visceral corresponding feeling to the thought in the body. You might say to your friend, may you be well. And then directing your attention to yourself. And then just saying to yourself, may I be well. So we've just got a few minutes just to set up our week of practice. So, I mean, in a way, this week is just an invitation to bring much more awareness what we communicate, how we communicate. So that's really the first thing for this week is bring more awareness to what you are saying and how you are saying it. But and just to remember that, I just wanted to make the point that this doesn't mean just what we say with our voice. It also means what we write, because a lot of our communication happens, through text. So again, just being aware of you can actually cause quite a bit of damage through text by not thinking about what you're saying or being unkind or just thoughtless. Actually, it can be quite easy to get yourself in a bit of a tangle. So I just wanted to make that point that this includes written words as well as what we say with our mouth. So just bringing awareness to that, bringing awareness to receiving communication as well, what effect it has on you. Just bring a whole much more awareness to that whole kind of area of life, because it is such a big area of life. When you think about it, you realize just how massive it is in terms of communication. And the second thing was, just seeing if you can explore that idea of rejoicing in merits in relation to the Metta Bhavana. You might find that just by reflecting, spending a bit of time before the practice, reflecting on things we appreciate about our friend, maybe even things we appreciate about ourselves, maybe even things we appreciate about the person we find difficult. It just changes the balance. Really what we're trying to do in a way with Metta Bhavana is just come to a much more balanced appreciation of other people and not have it skewed, which it usually is. We usually either overemphasize or underemphasize good qualities and bad qualities of people. So yeah, so that's the practice for this week. I just wanted to remind you as well about the retreat that we're running this weekend. So the retreat's very much on the last days of the Buddha, what's called as parinirvana. So it's really going to be exploring some of the in a way, like the sort of the deeper issues about life and death. So it'll be a really just a way of going much more deeply into what it means to be alive with other people, to hear some things, be able to talk to people, be able to practice meditation more, and just to give a whole lot more space for a weekend. So yeah, so if you want to book onto that, you can just go onto our website. You'll be able to book on that way. Or can you actually? Kevin might put a link in the thing in the chat. And yeah, remind you that we're doing the course on a donation basis. So if you can give to the Dublin Buddhist Centre, it'll just keep us going. And yeah, if you've got questions, do feel free to hang around at the end. Other than that, we look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to be looking at action, perfect action. So the whole area of ethics. So yeah, talk to you soon.